My name is Tim Roberts. I've been in IT for probably, sometimes it seems like not long enough, sometimes it seems like it's too long. I titled this Baking IT in Place Like a Layer Cake because it kind of makes sense in a way. Sometimes trying to help people, I explain things with analogies, and so layering up your security is like basically like a layer cake, or other types of food that work too, like lasagna. Each different layer's got something different. So my name is, like I said, it's Tim Roberts. I'm T Roberts 2 in the community, so if anyone's looking for questions or anything else, you can just find me in there and add me. My title's weird. It's basically IT Network Coordinator. It's one of those, they don't have an IT manager, but there's really two of us, so I'm the senior guy, so it's coordinator is another fancy title for manager, pretty much, supervisor. So one of the questions I always have with people is, how many layers does your IT security have? Like, there's different things you make it together with, so it's policies, procedures, everything else. But if you think about it, you break it down in an easier format, you work in layers. It's easier to find, if there's any holes or anything else, you can always figure, okay, where do I slide something in? So one of the things I sort of drew it a little bit more inspiration on is everyone pretty much, if you're used to IT or anything else, you've taken basic certifications. The OSI is pretty much the standard. There's different variations like TCP/IP stack and everything else, but pretty much one of the basic things everyone learns is the OSI model. I'm going to sort of break it down. We've got the added extra layer of the human factor because the application layer doesn't count the human side. So a lot of the things you get is like from whenever you have like issues with anything is the potential threats. So where do they come from? Most people think, in a business standpoint, if you're talking to the business owners, they're like, oh, well, everything comes in as a virus. Not necessarily. There's other things too that you have, like we actually had recently. We had a major storm. It rolled over our office in a half hour. And the company I work for does environmental cleanup, so the guys happened to be there in the warehouse with vac trucks. They're out there basically pumped like 12 55-gallon drums worth of water that was about to roll into the office where our data center is. So everyone thinks about IT security. They forget sometimes about the physical layer. So everyone starts like they automatically think logical, they start thinking like, packets and everything else, but they forget that sometimes you have electrical issues, you have water, you have environmental problems. So here's just some of the like basic examples of like different ones at different layers. So it's, like I said, one of the issues that we had was environmental. A lot of people don't think about it. Water, fire, electric. Other things too, it also includes keyloggers. They're still out there. You can still buy those little key logging devices online now. They plug in between like your USB port and anything else. You never know. Someone could be maliciously trying to find information out and they want someone's password. Basic thing is just plug one of those in and plug the keyboard into it. You have open ports. I'm not sure if anyone actually basically plugs up open ports on switches or patch panels. I know it's one of the things that I used to do was I would take basically the end of a Cat5, just basically a little connector. I would just into like dead ports or ones that I didn't want people to have access to. In the patch panel, I just stick one of the patch ends in. And that way like, okay, don't use this port. You also have like electromagnetic interference. Funny story was the one company I worked for was a telecom company. And one of the ladies in HR, she was at home. And she called up to complain, why is it every time I'm at home, I have issues with Wi-Fi? It drops intermittently on the laptop. Do I need a better one? It turns out her microwave she was using 2.4 gigahertz. Her microwave, she was sitting in the kitchen using it right by the laptop. And every time she would turn the microwave on, she'd get a loss of her VPN connection would go down because it was just enough interference that actually kicked her Wi-Fi down. So I told her, like, go buy a different phone, basically. Or what happens if you pick up the corded phone in the house? She goes, no problem. Okay, it's your cordless. So environmental controls are something else we had an issue with at 1.2, so I always make sure that's in there. We had an HVAC issue. Our unit went faulty. That basically it was, instead of being cooling, it switched to heat. So we had it actually pumping heat into the data center instead of actually cooling the data center. Yeah, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting alarms that the data center is reaching 90 degrees, and I'm like, what's going on? I connect in the cameras and check, is there a fire? No fire. I drive up there and I go in there, and it's the AC unit is blowing hot air because I put my hand near it. I'm like, this is not good. So the vendor came out. They switched it out for a completely different vendor because they tried a couple of them, but it didn't work. So some of the things is you have your what they call the vulnerabilities. So you'll see the next bunch of slides are pretty much the same thing. You've got left and right vulnerabilities and then options for protection. So power loss, most people know, get a UPS or something generator if you need it. We had another issue whether our generator was on a different panel. So when we moved our data center, what we were told was on the generator panel was not. So when we had local power loss for the area, our data center went down because the generator kicked in, but it wasn't feeding the UPS. So that was a fun night. You try and have other things built into, like any sort of redundant alarms, like do you put water sensors in, because like I said, we have water come in. Do you have fire, temperature alarms, stuff like that. I was saying about the basically unused patches. Just plug them maybe if you want to. Otherwise, it's up to you. If you're that security conscious. If not, it's sort of for you. Also, shielding for cables. A lot of people don't always use like shielded cables. They just throw them up in there. But I found like some of the older buildings, they've got the older electrical lights. They do cause interference in the wiring, and we've had one of our offices always complaining like, why is the internet so slow? And I'm like, they have 100 meg connection. There's only a handful of them there. Why is it slow? And we're checking everything else. And we're like, do me a favor, turn your lights off a second because it's a nice sunny day. I'm like, are they on? I'm like, yeah. And all of a sudden, the speed sort of starts picking up again because they had interference, but in this point, it was from the electrical, basically from the light side. So there's other ones too, like the data link layer. And so you've got MAC spoofing, you've got VLAN circumvention. There's other things, like I said, it's the network layer, you've got the route spoofing. You've got, like I said, different controls and protections for each of these. So it's, most people think of firewalls are only at the network layer, but a lot of times the more intelligent, newer firewalls work at multi-layer. So you have everything from sort of application layer all the way down. They are good. Sometimes they're software, sometimes they're hardware. So, and then, like I said, I'm going to run through some of these. So you get the transport layer. You've got like packet spoofing. A lot of people have probably heard about it. You also send illegal packet information. So it's basically something that's been crafted to look like it's a real one, but it's not. It's maybe there's either bad header data or something else that's in there. A lot of times, you've got the options for encryption and encapsulation. Sometimes it's better to sort of match those two together. That way that the data is encrypted, but it's also encapsulated within something else too. And if anyone has any questions at any point, stop me as well. So I don't mind. The session layer is, you've got either issues with authentication. There's either none. You also have the man in the middle where maybe someone's actually packet sniffing on your network, that they're going through, they're watching to see what's going on. They're basically hijacking your data. How many people actually turn on options on their wireless to watch to see if there's any rogue access points? Show of hands. Does anyone actually look for that on their network? Okay, good. I know there's some people that don't, and it's sometimes worrying because we turn that on as an option because we actually found in our office one guy they didn't tell us in that branch that they were reconfiguring the office. So they went from a space where there's one guy and one desk, 2 people. And instead of telling us that, hey, we need either another data drop in there or can you send us a switch, they just went home, they got a Linksys router, they plugged it in, they're wondering why the Wi-Fi is acting weird, and then the people are on the internet, but they're having problems connecting to other parts of the network. What's going on? I'm like, well, I saw something weird and I blocked it. So I called up the office, and the thing is, it was one of the main corporate offices. So it was I called up and I called our security guy. He walked into the room and he was he called me and he told me, does this look like it should be here? And I was like, no. You just pull it right out. And he was like, what do we need? And I'm like, you just need a switch. You don't need, what you put in was a router. So basically you had these guys were just sitting on the Wi-Fi. which we lock ours down, whereas this one was just completely free and open that everyone and their cousin was connecting to. Not fun. One of the things you can do for protection is you can encrypt passwords. You also set up, I know I worked in a place that had HIPAA compliance, so we had some passwords where the password expiration was super low, so it was every 30 days. A lot of times you'll find users, they got a 30-day password, they're writing that down. Like they reset that, they're going to write it down. It's going to be on their desk, either under the keyboard, on the screen even. Like how many people have actually gone by a user's desk and you don't even have to ask while they're there what their password is. You can see it tagged somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So we try and leave it further out where it's more like a 90-day one and sort of give them reminders, like try using things that are phrases, like try using, you've got the, basically substitution in there. So, you replace an E with a 3. It helps them, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have some users it doesn't matter what they change it to. The next day they get locked out because they just don't know. I'll also add and make sure you try and do limit the amount of failures of login. So 3 is normally a good thing, but I had one place where it was more like 2. So they come back, they'd forget, their caps lock was on before they left, and they type it in twice and they're locked out right away. It's not always fun. So other options are for the presentation layer, you've got issues with basically bad data, any issues with cryptography. You try and do protection with that, which make sure you update the software, because there's certain times maybe that you have RSA or anything else like that. You may be using tokens, but maybe it's outdated. Maybe you're on version 64-bit versus something much newer than that. Even that, it's maybe it's your email that you have. It's are you still using SSL? Or did you move over to TLS or anything like that? So application layer is one where it gets closer to the human end. So a lot of times people think application layer is the application itself. It's not. It's more like the way the application communicates with everything else in the network. So that's where you always see Microsoft every month, new flaws, patches, and everything else that are all coming out. That's normally most of their issues are at this point because they've got problems with either the back door, there's a port that's open that shouldn't have been, and or it's something else too, that maybe you've actually opened up ports in your firewall. We had a request the other day that for a postal meter, they wanted to open up port 80 and about 3 or 4 other ports, and I'm like, hold on a second, I've got to open ports in my firewall so your postal meter can work, that you can get a software update? I'm like, to me, it's no, it's not going to happen. I'm like, you can, because the other ones we have in our office, they work fine. So I'm like, it's the same network setup across every branch. If it works here, it should work there, which means your one's probably outdated or there's something wrong with it. So last time we had that, we just had them replace it. They got a newer piece of hardware, it worked fine. Not punching a hole in the firewall just because you've got old, outdated equipment. So one of the things that a lot of times you find in the firewalls, you'll find intrusion detection prevention. A lot of times that'll help save you. Years ago, it was you had one or the other. A lot of times the newer hardware or software does both. And it does help you. And on the fun one that everyone loves, the human factor. A lot of people don't realize that most of the time, you can go through, you can have every layer of protection you have. The human one is where you end up failing. So it's a lot of times that's just users click on things they're not supposed to. They try and do stuff maliciously maybe as well. We started locking down things like USB ports so that they couldn't just plug in a USB device and copy stuff. Sometimes you can actually add extra devices that they're allowed to use or certain people. So you had a policy that this group can actually copy files to USB. Everyone else can maybe just read the files, but they can't do anything with them. So, and the other thing is, most people that are trying to do anything malicious, they'll layer their attack. Sometimes it'll start by email, it'll start by a USB device, the whole, I know some companies have got the thing where I just had this USB device I picked up at wherever. I don't know who gave it to me, but let me just plug it in anyway. It's one of the reasons why we locked them down recently. You can read, but you can't do anything else with it. other times you go to websites, you'll see like, cross-site scripting, session hijacking too, that maybe the link looks real. Maybe it's like instead of Google, it's goggle.com. Everyone's probably seen at least one email that someone forwards to you. I'm not sure about this email. Like, is this a site real? And you look at it, and at first it looks real, and then you look at it, and you realize there's a misspell. The Apple with 2 E's at the end instead of. And a lot of times that's where the users get tripped up. They think it's something for them, and it's not. So it sort of rides on their own personality sometimes. But a lot of times you end up getting like there's now we had it where I've got it here. I listed as anti-whaling. I don't even know if it's a real thing, but it's the C-level attack where they're not attacking the actual C-level person. They're trying to pretend to be that person. And we've got a flood of emails that it's the name of the CEO of the company. It's publicly available. So the emails come in because other people's mailboxes have been compromised at other companies. They find the list of contacts, like, oh, great, here's a bunch of people to email. And all they got to do is quickly research online who's the CEO, who's the CFO, send an email into whatever employees they get. Hey, I need this. One of the ones we kept getting recently was please buy gift cards. Go to Walmart or somewhere else and buy the gift cards, send us the codes that are on the back of it. We actually had a lot of people that replied to it, but never went to the final step. But they initially replied, which means you've also confirmed that your email address is valid too, which means you're now open for further attacks. And that's the thing I try and educate people is like, be suspicious first. You can be paranoid, which is good, but be also a little bit more suspicious than normal. They are targeting you for a specific reason because they think your email address is already out there. You're a good target. Let's go again. Next part was layering of protection. Basically, it's like I said, you think about it. Think of the layer cake. How many layers do you have? How many people have just a basic firewall in place? Show of hands. Hopefully there's a lot of them. Anyone have like anti-spam in their email? Yeah, that's normally one of the common ones. That's the first way that they try and come through. They try and basically phish the users for the most part. Anyone else have what we consider like a next-gen firewall? Less of a show of hands. Okay. Anyone using more sort of software firewall versus like a hardware maybe for their clients? If they're a smaller business, sometimes they just go that way. Yeah, it's where I started. There was almost zero policies, like nothing. It was kind of like just everyone connected. Everyone relied on Citrix, and we actually got hit by a ransomware attack because one of our users opened a malicious email on the Citrix server, and the worst part was he said, it looked suspicious, but I opened it anyway. Yeah, that was not a fun time because when he opened it, that server was also connected to our file server, to our accounting software, and in the business that we're in, there's another thing called manifesting, where they track waste. So the manifesting system was also on that too. So this piece of ransomware started trying to spread out. And we had just gone through a migration of basically our old antivirus to the new one. So we were literally installing it on the file server the day that he opened it. So we had a few folders that were corrupted and we had to go back and restore. And we found a couple later on too. But for the most part, we did catch a good portion of it. But the main Citrix server just pretty much shut down. So it was our Citrix gateway server was the one that he happened to be connected to when he opened it. So it was a fun couple of weeks. And it did actually drive us from switching from the way the business model was, which is use Citrix to connect into everything. We actually had been wanting to redesign it as more of a wide area network. So every branch had their own router, they VPN'd back in. So at that point, I said, hey, we need to do a hardware refresh. Well, guess what? This is a perfect example of why. You put more layers between, you've got the VPN tunnels, but each router then has its own firewall. It's going to check whatever the traffic is. It should block that at this point. So a lot of people don't always think about policies. It's like I said, when I first started where I am now, there was pretty much none. So, you have things that like, I work at other companies like healthcare. They have a lot of policies and procedures because of HIPAA. Financial institutions, a lot of them are under like Sarbanes-Oxley. So you have to be sort of compliant with a lot of these things, and you have to create policies and procedures that actually work with them. Patching is another one too. If you don't have one, and if you're using Windows, a lot of times you want either WSUS or SCCM just to help push out updates. Sometimes you don't always want to push them out right away because, as everyone knows, Windows, you push them out, and then a day or two later, oh, there's a fixed patch for that patch and an update for the other one, security update, because that one stops the computer from booting completely, which is never good. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll hold off at least 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll roll them out because we sort of keep an eye on community, Spiceworks community, and other posts on Microsoft and other ones too, just to see have there been any issues with any of those updates. If there are, we put them on hold and we'll wait until the fixed patch comes out for the update. Logging is one that a lot of people don't use. How many people actually check your event logs on a regular basis? Anyone? I see a few quick shows of hands. Yeah, we started making changes to the systems that we would get notifications for a lot of the failures. We had one of our servers that it's not on-prem, thankfully. It's hosted by a third party. It just holds data that people can access publicly. And they basically got hit by a denial of service attack. So we were okay. The rest of our network was up and fine. This web host was getting pummeled. And we didn't mind. It was just, you know what, you can't get to that website? It's okay. We're not too worried about it. But we went back in the logs and found where it was coming from. We also found recently there was a bunch of emails coming in that they were trying to email out as someone from our company. So we had authentication turned on that if it fails, the email is not going to come through at, unknown user at ourcompany.com. It's basically just got blocked. But we were able to go back through the logs and see what IP addresses they were coming from. So we called up our ISP and said, can we at least please block this specific block? Because it was actually a whole Class C address that someone must have gotten a hold of and was just using it to spam and just keep sending more or trying to send out a spam to other people. So does anyone here use two-factor authentication, or even just for some applications? Okay, good. I know sometimes people find it problems you've got to keep your cell phone on you or something else, but it does help. There are sometimes there's also token-based. Where I used to work, our VPN was based with two-factor. You had your little RSA token with you at all times and have fun trying to connect whenever you forgot it and left it in the office for the day or it fell out of the bag. You got to find alternate ways of remoting in. I did that a couple of times and then never did it again. So let's hop on the next one real quick. So yeah, the next one also includes things like I said, user accounts. You also have monitoring and reporting. We actually have it, like I said, where you've got the on-demand, where it basically emails you hey, they're unauthorized attempted access. That's it's more of a critical risk maybe right now. Other stuff is maybe just, someone's trying to email and it's failing. I just looked through the logs and found the stuff. That's more historical. Like I said, filtering is another good thing to have too. Either you've multiple things, either applications. Email is pretty much the main one that most people have, one form or the other, Barracuda, a couple other vendors. It's one of the better things to keep because that's normally where, like I said, people are being attempted to be phished. So that's one of the first lines of defense that most people see if it's not the actual intrusion directly into the network. The other thing too is, like I said, we've sort of defined perimeters. We have web servers, but they're not even connected to our network. They are completely offsite a third-party hosting company. Our network is ours, and that's it. Everything else that's in there is hosted third-party. We don't know usernames and passwords are similar to it. So even if they did compromise an account on that one of the hosted servers, it doesn't connect to ours in any way, shape, or form. So it's one of the things you might want to do. A lot of people do the change your default administrator username, because a lot of times you'll change the password repeatedly, but how many people use administrator as their main admin account? Anyone rename it? Hopefully most people. I know one company I worked at, they were very Unix-based, so they used root for it. So it's kind of funny, like every Windows machine had like you had to log in as root. I was like, okay, it's kind of cool. One of the things that we've done is more like the multi-vendor. So we kind of went with, yes, we have a lot of certain types of hardware, but we've changed it because where you've got the extra layer where there's a little bit of more like dissimilar. So like if everyone's used to like, okay, there's Cisco hardware or there's Fortinet, and they think, okay, it's going to be that from one end to the other. If I know how to break in or there's certain vulnerabilities in like that version of the operating system, I should be able to just keep going A, B, C, D, and now I'm in. Now, if you put something dissimilar in the middle, okay, okay, I went Cisco, and now I've got Fortinet, and now I've got HP. Like, okay, we got more work to do because the same vulnerabilities will not always match up between the same hardware or software. One of the big things I always try and stress is also training. So, and it's not just for the IT staff, it's also the end user. How many people actually have an ongoing training program for cybersecurity for their users? Okay, good show of hands. I will say we actually had a hard time getting anything going because it was mostly in our business environment. They didn't really do it. They just thought, well, if it happens, then we'll train them. It finally happened. They started training them. Because a lot of times you'll see businesses, they won't want to do training for the end users because sometimes it'll actually cost money. You know, there's other free options out there. I ended up talking with the Trend Micro rep on Spiceworks one day, just messaging back and forth, and he realized that we actually had the software. They started doing phishing training almost like the KnowBe4. And he was like, okay, here we go. This is how you get into it. This is your licensing and everything else. So, you know, they're doing something similar. So I know KnowBe4 is one of the big ones, but there's other ones out there, especially for SMBs that, like maybe Cofense, if anyone's heard of that. If you haven't, it's for small companies, it's actually pretty good. You can get a lot of free training. So I'm just going to show some examples. So most people know like a lot of the big ones for network security. So you have like Sophos makes hardware, Barracuda. They make multiple layers, either like both web security and email as well. Most people think Barracuda is email, but it's not. It's Fortinet, it's Palo Alto. I worked at one company, most of our web filtering was done through Palo Alto. So there's Cisco and Cisco Meraki because they're two ends of the same beast almost, pretty much. And I've never actually used it, but Juniper was one that whenever I first started where I am now, there was a lot of old Juniper firewalls sitting in the stack. So I never really dug into them to sort of see what they were like, but I know they've been pretty good for a lot of people. The one thing I always stress is make sure your server is almost as well protected as your clients, because the clients can get to the internet and everything else. The servers most of the time aren't actively going to the internet, but the users are, and they're connecting to the server. And so hopefully you have same layers of protection on the server, because you might have someone who's got a laptop, they've been on vacation for a few weeks, there's a new virus that came out while they're on vacation, they're sitting there, they plugged in a USB port or something, and then they come back, they connect to the network, next thing, it's in there. I had that in my college whenever I was actually studying there, that we actually had denial of service in the college, that it was like late 90s, early 2000s, and it was an old Windows 95 machine that was unpatched, that had been turned off for a few months, and users came in, they had like zip drives and floppy disks, which most people nowadays are like, what are those? But there's people that still had them, especially then, and they had copied a file over onto the PC, and it was one of the older viruses that were more like a time bomb release, that it got copied over the machine and it didn't do anything. It sat there resident till either a certain date, which I'm not sure how many people remember like the older viruses that were like that, where they literally they sat resident, they didn't do anything, and then on boom, suddenly one day and everyone's machines went down. That happened with that. It basically performed denial of service. So the admissions couldn't do anything. The classes that I was actually sitting in, one of the classes where all of a sudden our entire internet went out. and we were trying to make changes and trying to re-image machines, and nothing was happening. All of a sudden, the progress bar went from like running all the way across to like it just stalled. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. It turned out it was actually just one old unprotected machine, and that's sometimes all it can take. So like I said, our approach for it, this is one of the things, just because it's our approach doesn't mean it should be everyone's. It depends what you have, where you are. Like if you have to be compliant with anything, you have to make sure you have the right tools in place. So like, we have on our physical endpoints, there's authentication where they log in with Active Directory. VPN, there's two-factor for especially for remote access. We keep guest and anything else that's not an employee device completely off the network. They actually connect in. We use Cisco Meraki, so anything that connects to it, they go out using Cisco Meraki's DHCP scope. They don't even touch our LAN. They're not even anywhere close to it. The messaging client that we use has encrypted communication, so if I send a message to you and it goes out on the internet, it's encrypted, and it gets decrypted when it gets to your end. We use MDM for most of our mobile devices. Other than a couple of people that have iPads that we just haven't been able to touch yet. But for the most part, it's you want to make sure that the machines are protected, because don't forget, part of the thing is also theft. It's how many people have had it where employees have been out and about and they just lose their laptop or lose their cell phone. Oh, two hands. We actually had it where one of our users got a convertible. They were traveling. There was a salesperson. They were traveling, and they went to the hotel. They left the laptop in the back seat, and they forgot. They came out the next morning. They're driving down the road, and they heard this weird flapping noise. They're like, "What's going on?" They slow down, turn around, and they realize that literally someone had cut a hole in the convertible. Yeah, it was a rental too, so that was even better. Yeah. So the cost of the company, don't forget, a lot of this stuff is, people don't think about it, but where's the cost come back and hit you? This is one of those things where it literally got stolen. This woman had a rental vehicle. So you then have to pay the insurance cost to pretty much replace it, because they don't patch those. And, but we also had the laptop that was gone. So the thing is, we were also a healthcare company too. Thankfully, there were sales. There was no personal information, so there's no HIPAA laws broken or violated. But it was just the fact that a company laptop had gone missing. So have fun trying to track it down. Oh. So does anyone use any? Oh.
Did you have hardware tracking on those?
At the time, they did not, but afterwards, they started thinking about it. And since then, I've left there, so I don't know if they ever implemented it. But I know, I try and tell people, even for their personal devices, I've used for Android, you've got the Google you can use to track it. Prey Project is one that I just use that's sort of free for up to 3 devices per email. I found it's kind of useful just for a personal thing for some people to keep an eye on cell phones, especially their kids. If you got a couple of kids and a couple of parents, they can keep an eye on where the kids are if they need to. But yeah, no, that's a lot of times people don't do that. They don't think about it till after the fact. How many people actually do track the hardware and the location? Anyone? Oh, that's right. So there you go. Yeah, we keep an eye on them, but it's mostly to make sure that they're on the job sites, because they do environmental cleanup. So just making sure, are you on the site? Yes, you are. Okay, fine. Or the occasional times where users have dropped the phone in a septic tank or a spill or something else, and they call up, "I'm not sure where my phone is. Can you look it up?" We actually found one that the little Caterpillar backhoes. They called me up and they said, "Oh, the Caterpillar ran over it." I'm like, "Hold on, a Caterpillar ran over your cell phone? How did that break it?" No, Caterpillar backhoe. And their friend that was there, the coworker, took the picture and sent it to me. So after they had used the GPS location, we found they tracked the phone down basically in the tracks in the ground. Yeah. It was an iPhone, so it was nice and shattered. The screen was just toast. So we also have next-gen anti-malware, which is it's a lot of times people don't really consider. Most people think of antivirus as just signature-based. We started adding options that the vendor we use basically has, the next-gen. So It does like behavior monitoring and everything else of the applications, making sure everything's working the way it's supposed to and not doing something that it's going outside the normal. On the network and server side, there's like, basically we segmented the network out. We've got like multi-layer and with basically multi-vendor too. So it's a little bit harder at times to manage it because if you think about it, the more layers you have, also the more you've got to manage. So we try to make it, because right now our department is a department of 2. So adding too many extra layers, we're basically going to be spending most of the time managing it versus actually working. Like I said, we took some of the servers, we put them off-prem. They're not even on our network. Some of our applications we had them on-prem, and now they've been moved over to more software as a service. So they're not on our network, but they've got multi-factor authentication. They've got to log into a PC in our office, but then connect back out to theirs with a second username and password credentials. And like I said, we also use basically monitoring with notifications. That way we find out, like, did someone plug something and they're not supposed to, like that Linksys router in the guy's office. One of the things for us, it just helps, is we use basically the management dashboards. For us, it's easier, so I know we use Meraki. This is actually, and the Barracuda's up there too, I forgot about that one. And Trend Micro is we use for worry-free just because it's easier for us to manage. I know there's other options, and we're looking at other things too, but dashboards a lot of times make it easier. A lot of times the old tools used to be you had to log into one server, connect in, open the software package in there, and everything else. Now a lot of them more like cloud-based or at least web-based, where you can, even on your intranet, you pull up the dashboard, go through, find the logs, whatever you need to do. And here's some of the options for the Meraki that, if you try and make sure that you have layers, like I was saying, like you either have like access lists, you have policies. Port schedules is something I actually sort of forgot to touch on. That also adds more of a physical layer of security. Maybe at 5 o'clock, no one should be in the office. So add port schedules to the ports on your switches or routers. Turn them off. Someone comes in and tries plugging something in, like a cleaner after hours, decides they want to plug something in, doesn't work. Guess what? How many people had like after hours theft, actually, too? We've had a couple of those, and it can be a little odd at times, but we ended up having to go like on the cameras and stuff to be able to watch and look. So, but the other things too, it's with Meraki, they've got a whole bunch of different tools that we utilize. So SD-WAN, it's almost like the new buzzword for. But we use that for traffic shaping and everything else as needed. We do site-to-site VPN, but we also have client-side, and it's basically, we don't do bring your own device. That's just a no. It's employee provided, or it's company provided to the employee. Sorry, and if they want to bring their own device in, the most they can get to is guest Wi-Fi, and like I said, that's segmented away. If you bring your own device and you're trying to connect into the network, it's not going to happen, and it's not allowed. So we had a couple of people try requesting it, that they wanted to bring in their personal laptop because it was better than the one that we provided them with. I'm sorry you went out and bought this, but you're not going to use that to connect back in. I'm like, there are rules and regulations, and one of them was a financial person. So I was like, you have heard of, like, especially financial compliance? There's other things like, is there anything you deal with that you really should worry about? And like, well, I just want to connect. I'm like, that's great that you went and bought a laptop that's ultra light, but not going to happen. So one of the things, like I said, but there's also content filtering too. We do it. We don't always turn it on. So we have basically the Trend Micro does that as well. So we kind of turn it on and off. So it's got the basic policies on one, but then we actually, if we want to, we go back in and we turn on more like harsher policies because we found users are abusing their internet access. A lot of stuff that we found that users end up using YouTube for training, so we kind of have to not block it. And we found some people are abusing it because they were using it for streaming music because they realized things like Spotify and the rest were blocked. So they're like, oh, we can go to YouTube and just create a little playlist and play it in work, and because YouTube's open. And then I'm like, why is their data usage like 30 times higher than anyone else? that's why. And then I'm like, you're getting blocked, and your bandwidth is getting limited, because that's all we did. That content filter just limits the bandwidth all the way down. So they can get to things that are like that they need to, but then afterwards it's blocked. Like I said, but the port scheduling is one of the options. You can turn that on or off. Some people like it, some people don't. You might find after hours someone shows up that those need to work. Meraki will show you how many clients and stuff are connected. And one of the things, like I said, is whenever you do the configuration, you've got different options. So you can set it up per SSID. You can set up VLAN tagging, content filtering on or off. So we use it, like I said, we do content filtering on the main network, but also on the guest side too, because we found some users trying to get to some unsavory stuff at various businesses that they're not supposed to. And one of the things that it's up to you. Like we don't even add a splash page. I know most people do for guest Wi-Fi. They make you can add it or not. We just provide them with whatever they need to. You can set up either it's using radius authentication or not. If you want to charge them for it, I'm not sure if you do. Maybe you want to get a little bit more, make them, basically the IT department's actually going to make money for the company, charge the users, but that might be frowned upon. This is one that I kind of had to purposely sort of rig in a way, where basically we did go back and we found some old logs with attempts at intrusion. So sometimes it's people trying to poke their way through and they're not supposed to. And then other times it's someone's got something on our website that they're trying to get to, and the site's basically just saying no. So one of the things most people don't think about is, where does the cost come in? So it's just some sort of food for thought. A lot of times, how many people have actually had a breach that they know about? Okay, how long did it take you to find out? Okay.
Yeah, it was a ransomware attack, so.
Yeah, with us, it would happen pretty much live. We realized there was a slowness, but a lot of times that people don't even realize it's there. Like they might have had a breach and they don't find out till months down the line. So, and the cost, depending on what it is, like, I put in here like the healthcare cost, mostly because of the fines are higher. Because there are some times where there's an actual fine versus your actual just the cost of trying to get the data back or anything else. This is actually, you will get a fine because of legal implications because of it. Like I said, thankfully that laptop didn't have any connection to the rest of the network, the one that went missing. Otherwise there might have been fines along with that too, and I don't even know how much that might have cost the company. The last little thing is also like there's the breaches, a lot of it can be caused by human error. So it's not always by malicious. Sometimes it's actually either user error, or the system glitched itself, so you get bad programming. And like I was saying, it doesn't actually matter. It's up to each individual, and sometimes it's also up to the company. Do you have compliance that you have to follow? Any laws? GDPR is one that's thrown around a lot. Like just because you don't actually do business with someone, like directly, maybe there is one of the vendors that you work with that the data that you're transmitting back and forth still needs to be GDPR compliant. Right now, it doesn't affect the US as such, but it does maybe affect your customers if there are any that you deal with. Make sure you document stuff. It does help. When I first started where I am now, their documentation was a half a sheet on a Word document of passwords. That was their entire network documentation. It was horrible. I pretty much sat the first 3 months picking the network apart, like literally like layer by layer, finding out usernames, passwords. I literally had to break into switches just to find out, or just reset the password, just so I knew how to make sure everything was connected, because I didn't know what way it was set up and I didn't trust it either. Yeah. Make sure things are updated. That's one of the things too. It's make sure you do have maybe a patch policy. Do you push them out every month? We do, but we wait 2 to 3 weeks. It's up to you. Sometimes everyone wants to push them out. It's out. Push it out today. That's on you. There are multiple layers of attack. So if there's the human issue, and then there's the environmental issue, it ranges from literally extremes. Never mind the other logical issue where someone's sending some malicious files over. It could be, like I said, you have flooding, you have a fire. How many of you have a DR site that if your primary one goes down and the fire or the whole idea of if a fire or a bomb hits your office, do you have somewhere else where the data is accessible and you can recover in the business? Anyone? Good show of hands. It's helpful. Yeah, some people don't, and it can be a problem. Like there was one of the other things I was talking to someone earlier. They literally lost power, and like I said, where I was, they lost power. We had nothing. There was no access to any data except our website. Unfortunately, that didn't include emails. But if you don't have it, go back, start looking. Like, are there any policies and procedures? Check to see the last time they were even updated. I found some that they don't even include social media, which has been around long enough now that it should be. But should you limit your employees to social media? Somewhat, because some of them will abuse it. Some of them won't. And I have one user that says, I'm going to be on there at like half an hour at lunchtime. That's fine. But test. A lot of times, people don't even test. Anyone done either a vulnerability assessment or penetration testing? Okay, good. That does help. It's where we are right now. I'm going back through the stages of I want to change all the hardware out. So I actually want to do both. So I figured I'll do a vulnerability first, switch the hardware out, and then afterwards do a penetration test to sort of find where the last little holes are in the network. Plug the leaks basically at that point. And hopefully get most of them, if not all of them, because things change, they find vulnerabilities. So, they come out or you add a new patch and that actually creates a vulnerability that wasn't there before. So it does happen. Welcome to Microsoft. But training is also one of the big things too. So, should users be plugging in any random USB device that they had? Like maybe their kid had it in school and they put files on it that they were working from home and then they come into the office? How much do you trust someone else's network? Never mind your own. So I want to sort of wrap it up here with like I said, how you bake your layer cake is up to you. So it can have multi-layers. It can have only like maybe 2 or 3. But do you add software, hardware? Each cake is individual. Anyone here like to bake, cook, anything? Like I said, lasagna will work too. So it's like everyone has their own take. Like how many has like their mother's recipe? This is how you made this. In the environment, in the business, it might be that you have to fall under compliance laws that maybe another business doesn't. So your approach will be different from theirs. There are best practices that are out there. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them are confusing at times too if you're not used to them. And sometimes you're sitting there and a SOX compliance auditor walks up to your desk and drops a binder on there and says, yeah, you didn't have authorization for that. Why did you give that guy access to this folder? The one company I actually worked at did have that, where if someone left the company, you had to have compliance, legal, HR, and the department's manager to give approval for files, for basically access to files for basically either a terminator or an employee that resigned. It wasn't just because Bob decided to walk up today and said, hey, that guy left 2 weeks ago, I need to find this file. That company said, no, you need all of these authorizations. And you have to make sure you put it in the ticket, because if you don't and the auditor shows up, was it verbal? Great, prove it. That one's one you always make sure, you cover yourself. Does anyone have any specific questions or anything?
What do you think about Internet of Things? Internet of Things devices, even if it's on the public Wi-Fi? Internet of Things devices, Alexis, Google Home, even if it's on your public network, it's on your Wi-Fi, your guest network. So it's totally segmented off.
Yeah.
What do you think about those in the office?
I normally try and avoid them. So like I know people will come in and they'll try and add them, but a lot of times because they've got to go through like a username and password phase and everything else, the Internet of Things devices like an Alexa or else won't really work, because you have to normally get to the splash page to log in for hours. So normally if IoT devices aren't even an issue in our branch or the branches that we have, so they're okay, but I specifically wouldn't really trust them. You know, unless it's maybe some of the newer ones that they are supposedly more secure. But you know, is there any antivirus on those devices? I really doubt. Anyone seen any IoT devices that said that they actually have patch management or security on them? I haven't really seen any of them that even say that they're secure.
We've had the discussion internally within the IT department on what our approach is going to be, but then the bigger question became, what other smart devices are listening? Because
Exactly.
that was our biggest concern, is what is it listening to and the triggers. And every smartphone pretty much has a
Something.
trigger. Yeah, so it's listening. It's always listening. They are all always listening. It's just they're listening for trigger words.
Yep.
And it's the same thing for Google Alexa or Google Home or Amazon Alexa.
Cortana even.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a bigger challenge than it is right now.
Somebody explain to me why Cortana is on a server.
Really? So someone, go ahead.
Well, it's actually, I'm sort of joking, but if you've taken a look at Server 2016, you will see services like Xbox services and things like that. And why?
Yeah, there's.
I mean, I know this isn't the form for it, but still, why?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's like uniform code base, but unfortunately that has that same problem where like, why do you need Xbox? Like, it shouldn't be on there. That should be stuff that's stripped out. Like maybe you've got a core and then you add the extra services if it's desktop, but server, that's kind of horrifying.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Tim, over here.
Oh, hey.
Boss. A question and a comment.
Sure.
What's your take on, say, communal or public logins for, say, conference rooms, security-wise?
We don't even use them. Yeah,
So
we.
how do you have them access the, say, conference room PCs, their own actual logins?
Yeah, I worked somewhere else before that they had roaming profiles, so we had issues with that. So, and that caused like a lot of times like someone's profiles downloading. Where I am now, we don't use roaming profiles, so it's normally like they log in a couple of minutes ahead of time. I try and tell people if you need to set anything up, make sure you show up a few minutes early. So it's like who's going to show up at the very last second and like, oh, is this working?
And one comment overall that I've learned is get a seat at the table. Like if you really want to make an effect in your company,
Yes.
step up, have that one key person to back you up no matter what, especially if it's the owner of the company.
Yeah, if it's the owner,
'Cause
director,
everyone's
VP,
going to
someone.
hate all of our security recommendations, honestly. But if you have the CEO and you tell him, look, do you want to lose money or not? You decide what you want to do. The second in charge will bitch and complain, but then you go, oh, yeah, go talk to Tim.
Yeah,
I'll do whatever he says.
You normally need someone in the buy-in area just so that at least if they understand financially where issues might arise, it's like where it's going to cost them. A lot of times, otherwise they'll just ignore it. So if you tell them this can hit you in the pocket, like I said, the one slide had like some of the costs, like the cost per record, 100 and change. I'm like, imagine you get an entire folder gets say encrypted. There's maybe a couple thousand files in there. There you go. How much is that going to cost you down the line just to get it decrypted, or at least to go back? Maybe work with an MSP to get them to fix it where they can still get in or unlock the files versus paying those bitcoins.
A comment on the question about the Xbox stuff.
Yes.
I installed Office 365 on our desktops, and
Yes.
because my license server was still issuing the old license, the software identified itself as Office 2016, and yet when I changed the license on the machine without changing any software, then it was Office 365. So it's baked in there. They can't pull it out.
It's like wonderful Microsoft. We use it. I don't mind it, but I know there's a lot of times there's issues because of stuff like that. Another question back there?
What would you say are some good practices for encryption when it comes to trying to fight physical theft of somebody? Let's say they get into your server room and they just go out pulling out disks. What would you say are best practices for?
Well, do you have a lock on the door, first of all?
Well, I mean, I'm saying, after hours somebody comes in with a huge crowbar or something that's just completely...
Well, it's, a lot of times, like, do you add encryption to servers? It might slow it down.
Yeah.
We had it where the one company that it was a fun thing because those servers had the option for either encryption or compression. and the amount of data that was on there was all compressed. Someone went in there and checked the box for encryption, decrypted the entire. Basically, it didn't decrypt. It basically decompressed the entire stack of data and filled up the entire drive. So you got to check ahead of time if it's even capable.
So you'd say it's on a case-by-case basis to have hardware or hard drive level encryption?
Yeah, it's one of those. It's like for laptops and stuff like that, stuff that's portable that you might be able to take it away, like end user stuff. Yes, servers and the rest. It depends on how secure your facilities are. You know, it's how many people are going to know exactly which room to break into that's a data center in an office. You know, at that point, you're probably catching them on camera going through. So there's that too. They're going to be really dedicated at that point. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one real quick question.
Sure.
So you're using Meraki, we're using FortiGates. Web filtering for HTTPS is a major pain in the arse because it breaks so many sites or it just doesn't work. And we consult with some other companies, and like one of our partners uses Sophos UTM,
Okay.
and it's even worse.
Oh, it is.
So does it seem like for Meraki, does it seem like it's a work in progress too? Or are you always having to tweak it? Or does it work pretty well for Meraki?
From what we use, like I said, we use that as more like that last step where we have Trend Micro as our normal like endpoint side, and then if it gets to the point where they're more abusing it, that maybe their users are figuring out how to bypass that or go to other sites, then we just sort of lock them down. Meraki just, you're on our network at that point, you're supposedly working. Now your content's going to be filtered and your bandwidth's going to be lowered. So, they try to get to some streaming media sites and stuff, and all of a sudden it's like, why is it buffering? Why is it not loading? At that point, they hopefully just give up and they realize. So, and we've normally at that point also had a conversation with their manager. Just, because at that point it's, manager's like, hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to be working for me, not sitting there. Yes. So at that point, yeah, we normally go to the manager and then they leave it. We're like, we will give it to you. You can deal with it, but if it continues, it's going somewhere else. Because we'll do the reporting side of it, and it's on them to figure out the rest of it.
If I can add to that, the one conversation we've been having with our Spiceworks groups is whether to have HR incorporate a kind of a credit system in the review system actually on users. So hey, what's your IT hygiene like? So when they go in for their reviews, there's a little bit of a grading system there saying, hey, you know what, this person did not cause many issues on the IT side.
Yep.
And I put it up on Spiceworks, and I called it something to hit him where it hurts in $signs.
Yep.
They'll listen. It's still in discussion. There's a lot of people don't feel for it. Why are you going to threaten their raises that way? But it's not us. You're doing it to yourself.
Yeah.
Which ties back to HR.
Would that backfire on you, though?
Not on me. I'm safe.
Yeah.
They don't submit a ticket because they're afraid that it's going to go against their IT hygiene.
That's why it's only a discussion right now.
Yeah.
Right. But it's something that we should all bring up and have the discussion in Spiceworks. And fine, see, that's an incredibly valid point. They'll be afraid to tell us, I screwed up. I caught myself.
Yeah, so we actually had it where our...
It could go either way. It's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. But in my case, I have the CEO on board, and I also have my users who know that I'm watching everything.
Yep.
I may not, honestly, but they think I am. And that's enough of a deterrent.
Yep. Our director every month, so I've got to run it in a couple of days probably, he gets a report of who's been doing what, who's been trying to get to more social media sites, streaming media, who's basically being unsafe on the network. So we actually have that, and the report goes to the director. And there's been times where, like I said, the one guy, I opened something that I shouldn't have, and he was gone 2 weeks later. Because the amount of damage that he caused to the network, like I said, it's our Citrix server went down, and half the other stuff got infected one way or the other. So.
What generates those reports?
For us, well, it's a combination of Meraki's reporting and Trend Micro. I set up the report in there, and I get an email, and I just sort of go back through it and pick and choose and copy and paste to him. Here you go.
That's a monthly summary?
Sorry?
The monthly summary report?
Yes. Yeah. It works.
Power in that.
It works great. All I've got to do is normally like there's PC names, and I know which users they are. I think we need to sort of wrap up unless there's one more question or two.
I just had one thing to add.
Yeah, sure.
Trying to be loud here. You mentioned disaster recovery, making sure you have a disaster recovery thing in place. Please check that it works at
Yes.
a user level. I've been fighting that for the last 3 weeks. We found out that it works for admins, but for the user level, you're screwed. So just kind of heads up.
Yep. Yeah, I think. Well, if anyone has any other questions or comments, just message me in the community. Or on Discord too. I almost forgot about that. Thank you. Thank you very much.